Welcome to Downtown Sports. My name is Downtown Stephen Brown, and in today's video, guys, I want to go over a rumor that Elliotte Friedman talked about last Saturday night on Hockey Night in Canada. According to Elliotte Friedman, there's more than one team that's interested in trying to unite the Schenn brothers, so Brayden Schenn and Luke Schenn, on a team this year before the trade deadline. And on Monday on the Fan Hockey Show, he mentions the Maple Leafs as being one of those teams. If you go back to the 2009 NHL draft, the Leafs had just selected Luke Schenn 5th overall the year prior, and they really wanted to draft his younger brother Brayden, and they had the 7th overall selection, but he ended up going 5th overall to the Los Angeles Kings. The Leafs ended up drafting Nazem Kadri instead, and Brian Burke missed out on the opportunity to have two brothers lead the Maple Leafs back to the promised land. But Luke did end up coming back after being dealt to the Flyers for James Van Riemsdyk several years after the fact, and he did help the Maple Leafs win their only playoff round in like 20 years, so I'm not going to knock him too much, but he's even older now. That was a couple of seasons ago, and his younger brother Brayden is 33, turning 34, and only on pace for 17 goals and about 45 points or so. So at this point in their careers, are these two players that can help the Maple Leafs, and are they worth the price that it's going to cost to get them? So let's start with Brayden Schenn, who signed for 3 more seasons beyond this one, albeit at $6.5 million. I don't like the $6.5 million number, but I do like that this isn't a rental player, right? It makes you feel a little bit better about potentially spending a first-round pick and maybe even a prospect to acquire this player. But like we mentioned, he's only on pace for 17 goals and 45 points, and that's on a St. Louis Blues team that isn't the greatest offensively, so maybe there is more to give there, especially, he would be playing behind Austin Matthews and John Tavares in Toronto, so maybe there's a little bit more to give there in a bit of a softer role. He's there for depth, but with him being 33, turning 34, I don't necessarily know how I feel about him making $6.5 million. Maybe if the Blues wanted to retain a little bit, maybe they made him a $5 million player instead, but that just keeps increasing the cost to acquire this player, right? You're at a first and a prospect before, and now maybe to retain, especially for 3 more seasons, the cost is only going to go up. So right away, there's a couple of pros and cons that stick out at you. He's 33, turning 34, and he makes $6.5 million. How much does he have left in the tank? And at $6.5 million, that's pretty expensive. And if you want the Blues to retain any money on him, well, he's already going to cost you an arm and a leg, and that's only going to make the price go up. But he still is on pace for 17 goals and about 45 points on a Blues team that isn't the greatest, especially offensively. So if you're looking at players who aren't on the greatest teams, I always like looking at the micro stats because it kind of lets you see under the hood a little bit. What is this player doing well on his own, and what is he not doing well on his own? Well, Brayden Schenn, at this point in his career, he's a second-line center. He plays behind Robert Thomas on the St. Louis Blues, but he is still a responsible player in his own zone. He's good at getting the puck out of danger, and in the offensive zone, he generates rebounds, and he's a pretty good playmaker. So in the playoffs, when there's less time and space, you want to be able to score those dirty goals. Brayden Schenn is going to help you out there. He is a top 6 forward. He is a second-line center. If we're looking at the Blues numbers when Brayden Schenn is on the ice versus when he's not on the ice, I think we need a little bit more context to these numbers here because while the Blues are much better when he's on the ice offensively compared to when he isn't, I think that has more to do with his most common line mates, Jordan Kyrou and Dylan Holloway. But like we saw in the micro stats, I do still think that Brayden Schenn is contributing positively offensively, right? He is a pretty good passer. He is getting the puck to dangerous areas, and he is generating rebounds, and good offensive players are going to be able to take advantage of that. And now defensively, this is the one that I think that needs a little bit more context here. The Blues are way worse defensively when he's on the ice compared to when he's not. He's not playing an overly difficult defensive role either, and like we said, Robert Thomas plays those top line minutes for the Blues this season. But if you look at his most common line mates, there's a bit of a theme in St. Louis there. Brayden Schenn is always usually playing with guys like Dylan Holloway, who's a young player who's really good offensively, not so great defensively. Jordan Kyrou, a very good offensive player, not so good defensively. A guy like Brandon Saad, who's never been known for his defense. A guy like Jake Neighbors, who's a very young player. I believe that in St. Louis, he's sort of used as a babysitter in that aspect, right? They pair him with players that they don't necessarily trust so much in their own zone, and he helps them get going in the right direction. So I think on the Leafs, who are a much better team overall, I think you would see these numbers swing positively in both directions. We'll take a look at how these players fit into the Maple Leafs lineup and cap situation a little bit later on in the video, but in moving on to Luke Schenn here, this is a guy who baffles me, right? He's 35 years old. He's turning 36. He signed for another season at $2.75 million. He's a right-handed shooting defenseman, and his nickname is the Eraser, right? He's the NHL all-time leader in hits because they didn't officially start keeping track of the stat up until about 20 years ago or so. Let's take a look at Luke Schenn. If we're looking at Luke Schenn's stats on the Predators when he is out there versus when he's not, the Predators are a worse offensive team when Luke Schenn is on the ice compared to when he's not. And I expected that, right? But in looking over the numbers here, defensively, the Predators are a much better team with Luke Schenn on the ice compared to when he's not. When we contextualize these numbers a little bit more, they start to make more sense, right? He's sixth on the Predators in terms of the percentage of his ice time that he spends playing up against the other team's best players. He's playing on their third pair. But when he does play against the other team's best players, he plays the fewest percentage or the lowest percentage of offensive zone starts of anyone on their blue line. So when he does play up against the other team's best players, it's most often than not in his own zone. And the Predators just about break even in those minutes with him going up against the other team's best players, even when he is playing the majority of that ice time in his own zone. But overall, they're just a better team with him on the ice, especially defensively. And I want to point out this area right in front of the net here. It's this deep, deep blue color. And in these heat maps, what that means is that there's nothing happening there. And that's on the right side of the ice where he plays. He's good at protecting the front of his own net while the play is going on. And between whistles, you know what he adds there, right? If you remember that playoff series against the Lightning, you remember him standing between the benches and absolutely eating everything that Pat Maroon was saying to him. And Tanner Jeannot, he looks at Tanner Jeannot and says, "You didn't win any Stanley Cups in Tampa Bay. I did. Get lost. Get out of here." And then he actually just made him eat his fist later on in the series, and the Leafs won. And, at the beginning, because he was playing the majority of those minutes with Morgan Rielly, I was nervous every time Luke Schenn and Nikita Kucherov were on the ice. But as the series went along, I got more and more comfortable with it. He was breaking the puck out of his own zone. He was making passes. He was just responsible that entire series. I really don't know how or why or if it makes sense at all, but he was one of their more effective players. I just think at this point in his career, he was playing 17 and a half minutes a night for the Leafs in that series against the Lightning. Now he's only playing about 15 minutes a night with the Predators. It's just a matter of, how many minutes can he give you sort of thing. Here's sort of what I was talking about before. If you're looking at the numbers for Morgan Rielly and Luke Schenn on the ice against the Lightning in the playoffs a couple of years ago, the Leafs outscored the Lightning 6-1, and they controlled the vast majority of the expected goals, the scoring opportunities, the high danger shot attempt share right in front of the net. And it was in, a pretty balanced role here. Obviously, I believe it was Jake McCabe and TJ Brodie who ate the majority of the minutes going up against guys like Kucherov and Brayden Point and Steven Stamkos. But these guys also were on the ice against those guys as well. And the Maple Leafs won that playoff series, and I was very comfortable with these two guys out there on the ice together. And Morgan Rielly is a guy who's had 6 different D partners this season, and that's not the fault of those 6 guys. It's a shared blame. He hasn't had the best of seasons as well. And he's had a lot of different D partners throughout his career, and people are maybe sort of starting to point the finger at him and saying, well, we've gotten you all of these different guys to play with, and none of them have worked, so maybe the problem is you. But I don't think that that's necessarily fair to him because he has had success with good players, right? Guys like Chris Tanev this season, Morgan Rielly and Chris Tanev have been good this year, but they need Chris Tanev to play with Jake McCabe. For a number of years, it was TJ Brodie until TJ Brodie started to break down. He's had success with good players. He's had success with bad players. He's just at this point in his career, he's not a miracle worker at this point. Maybe he needs a little bit more help as well. And if you give him some familiarity here, maybe you can capture lightning in a bottle a second time. Hopefully they don't have to play the Lightning another time. They've been on a bit of a tear as of late, but I could see that working. If we're looking at the Maple Leafs lineup with both of these players in it, it's an absolute non-starter. You need 50% salary retained on Luke Schenn in order for that trade to make any sense. He makes $2.75 million a year right now. That's too much to gamble with a guy who's going to be 37 by the time that contract expires. And at $1.375 million, if you buried him in the minors, he'd only be on the hook for like 200K or so. So that would be much easier, much more manageable if you needed to trade him. I think you can get another team to take that very easily. Now, you might have noticed through me talking over the last minute or so that the Maple Leafs are over the salary cap with both Brayden and Luke Schenn on the lineup, even with some salary retention on both players. And this is where it sort of gets kind of complicated because Craig Berube mentioned that Calle Jarnkrok is going to be back pretty soon. And if he comes off of LTIR, that complicates things even further because now you're $4 million over the salary cap. I don't necessarily know how the specifics of each trade would break down. You know, maybe a roster player would have to go back to the Blues or the Predators in order to make the money work. I mean, maybe somebody like Max Domi, who's had a real tough season this year, that would be disappointing because I've had a lot of fun watching him play for the Maple Leafs, especially with the history there with his dad and him growing up in Toronto and him seemingly really wanting to be here. It just hasn't really been much of a fit. Especially Craig Berube doesn't really seem to want to play him with Austin Matthews. He doesn't really fit Craig Berube's system. And he's not a third line center. And even when he plays on the wing on the third line, he's not really driving play very much either. I mean, maybe if they got Brayden Schenn and they were able to fit both of them in the lineup here, Brayden Schenn can be kind of like a babysitter, like he has been in St. Louis for a couple of guys defensively. And that works out somehow. But maybe he has to be included in one of those trades for cap reasons. If you did include a guy like Max Domi in one of the trades as a cap casualty, you can send down somebody like Steves or Holmberg, and you can see that with Yanni Hakanpää on LTIR, the Maple Leafs would be a cap-compliant team. But maybe part of the plan to trade for both brothers and to unite them is that, you know, they played together in Philadelphia for 2 or 3 seasons earlier on in their careers, and maybe that idea really appeals to them. And if there's a team that's willing to trade for both of them, well, Brayden has a full no trade clause, and if a team is going to trade for both of them, you know, maybe he waives that no trade clause only to go to that one team under, you know, the idea that he's going to get to play with his brother again. And if he's only willing to waive his no trade clause to go to one team, well, you know, maybe the price is a little bit cheaper, or maybe the Blues are willing to be a little bit more accommodating or flexible in terms of taking salary back or retaining at that point. If I'm being honest with you guys, I think Brayden Schenn is like a year or two too old for my liking to really consider this at this point, especially at $6.5 million. Would really help if the Blues retain a little bit, but then again, that might be getting pricey, but maybe not. You know, maybe he just really wants to play with his brother and he forces their hand, like we said. I don't know. What do you guys think? What are your opinions? Let me know down in the comments section below. Make sure to like the video if you did like it and subscribe for more because more will be on the way. And I'll see you again in the next one.